don't feel like I put forth the same effort to resolve something because I can just will something into happening. That doesn't seem right to me.
In a fucked up way, I can actually relate to that quite a lot. But, for me, I've always had my fists. And man, is it way easier to solve problems when you're beating the shit out of somebody. I got hands to you. That was awesome. That was awesome. I want to know how to do that. You beat me.
Very well. Your first lesson begins now. Now, depending on what you wish to learn, there are different places where you can pull the information from the body.
Pop, pop.
Find wherever corruption is, root it out, and let the system do its job. If the system isn't doing its job, destroy the system.
Okay, good morning, stream.
Like I can see things.
Look over here.
Not that I really badly need the light right now, but you know, let's look good. I think we can bang out 2 chapters today if I'm really on the ball. So that's what we're going to try to do. Hey, morning, Nix. We get to do a chapter with Enelin and Eamon. They're finally in the story. Ah, I'm so excited. All right. Today we are recording Nix. Oh boy. I don't like how that's sounding. We'll get through it. Here, one sec. Check, check. Oh, yeah. That's that cardioid pattern. Oh. Oh, yeah. It's all coming together. Lifemage dawning. Nope. Abort, abort, abort. Check, check, check. Hey, that's awesome, Nix. Glad to hear it. Lifemage dawning, recording day 9, beginning as always with 30 seconds of silence, starting now. All right. Oh, my voice is a little rough today, and I don't actually even know why. Gonna mute for just 1 sec. Okay. Chapter 11. Wartime King. Lifemage Dawning, Chapter 11. Wartime King. Eamon of the family Lemstad, Lord Prince of Underrealm and son of the High King, was in his chamber. It was a fine room and large, though it felt smaller thanks to the work table he had constructed for himself. There he had many small blocks of wood and a collection of carving knives, and there were usually some scraps of wood shavings dusting the place, though he cleaned them often. Too, he had some small brushes and a collection of fine paints gathered from all corners of the 9 kingdoms. When his hours were free from duties of state, which was less often than most, but more often than most would think, he would while away the hours at his little desk, carving soldiers or knights, or sometimes other figures, first whittling their shapes from the wood before painting them in bright and vibrant colors. It was the only time and place in the palace, and indeed in all the world, where he was able to be entirely alone, at least until a knock came at his door, as it did now. Eamon lifted his head and frowned, but his voice when he spoke was pleasant. "Come in." The door opened. One of his guards poked her head in. Her name was Hodari, Eamon recalled, and she had only recently been assigned to him. She had a dazzling smile, and he wished she would show it more often. "Your Excellency," said Hodari, "Idulin of the family Steth is here to see you." "Why, send him in at once," said Eamon. He put down his carving knife and hurried to sweep away the wood shavings that littered the table. He had not quite finished when Idulin entered, and He had not quite finished when Idulin entered, and Eamon went to embrace him. "Good day, friend," said Eamon. "I hope business has not brought you here and we can have a drink, though I suspect that is not the case." Let's just go full bore, right? Like, there's no reason to be subtle about this shit. "Your Excellency," said Idulin, grinning, "you are astute as always. I bring a summons from the High King. She requests your presence." "A summons?" said Eamon. "Surely she could have sent one of her own messengers." Idulin bowed his head. "She happened to see me standing near, and it is hardly a dishonor to bring word of the..." "She happened to see me standing near, and it is hardly a dishonor to bring word to the Lord Prince himself." Eamon smiled and clapped him on the shoulder. "Humility is a hard cloak to pull off, but you wear it well. Stay near, will you? I should like that drink regardless, and who knows but that I may need your help with whatever my mother wishes to speak with me about." "Of course, Your Excellency," said Idulin, bowing his head again. "Then excuse me." Eamon gave Idulin's shoulder a last squeeze before striding out of the room and towards his mother's throne room. See, now we're going to be smart, and we're going to save a sound file for Idulin. Oh no. And now, the next time Idulin pops up, we won't be wondering what the hell he sounds like. He swept through the halls, his half-cape swirling behind him, exchanging pleasant smiles and greetings with the guards and servants who scurried about, seeing to the business of the palace. Not for the first time, he bemoaned the way most of them reacted to him, too deferent, too overawed. Only those who had known him most of his life treated him as a real person. But he shed such thoughts as he approached the throne room, and the guards there swung the door open before him. "Her Majesty is in her private quarters, Your Excellency," said Olav, even as they bowed. Eamon thanked them and strode through the empty throne room. 2 attendants were cleaning it, though Eamon had never seen a speck of dirt within. They fell to one knee and bowed their heads. Eamon gave them a nod and a smile, but they did not see it, and again he wilted a little inside. His mood darkened further the moment he saw his mother. Enelin sat at a small side table, where she often dictated her letters and read reports from kings and other nobles across the 9 kingdoms. But there were no papers there now, and the quill lay dry. She had leaned back in her chair, legs apart, one elbow on the chair's arm and her chin burrowing into her fist. She looked crushed, as though she almost choked on her own spit. She looked crushed, as though a great and invisible weight drove her towards the floor. Her eyes were distant, and she did not seem to notice as Eamon came to a stop in her doorway. Eamon shook off a sense of foreboding. "Your Majesty?" he said tentatively. Eamon blinked and looked up. "Eamon," she said. She got to her feet. Almost she began to speak, but then she darted a look around at the 3 guards stationed in her room. "Give us a moment alone." The guards filed out quickly and silently. Eamon kept his eyes on his mother. She looked as worried as he had ever seen her, and she seemed to be avoiding his gaze. He could think of no business that would have produced such an effect on her, no rumblings among the politicking that always plagued the palace. After the last guard left, Enelin went to another side table and poured a glass of wine. She looked back at him and held the decanter over a second glass. "Yes, please," said Eamon. "But, Your Majesty, what is wrong?" "Mother, now, if you would," said Enelin as she poured his wine. She went and sat at her table again. Eamon pulled a chair over from the corner and sat near her, taking his glass and then placing one of his hands over hers. "Mother," he said, "please speak to me. You almost have me frightened." Ennelin's mouth worked. "I have just received a messenger, a small party of messengers, in fact. They once traveled with Jordell of the family Adair." Ennelin finally looked up and met his gaze. "Jordell has died." For a long moment, Eamon was still. Only his hand moved, sliding over to grip the arm of his chair as if for support. "How?" he said, surprised at the quietness of his own voice. "He died in the Great Rock Mountains, west of northern Selvin." "But how?" repeated Eamon. "What was he doing there? Was it an accident?" "No," said Ennelin. "He died in battle." She took a deep pull of her wine and then set it on the desk before leaning forwards, elbows on her knees as she rubbed her hands slowly before her eyes. "I have told you several things over the years, Eamon. Some of them were things I should not have told you, strictly speaking. Do you remember what I have said of the Ceremancer and the Necromancer?" Eamon scoffed. How could one forget such a thing? But then his grim smile vanished, and he froze, staring at her. "Yes," said Ennelin quietly. "They have been reborn. Jordell found the Necromancer's forces in the Great Rocks. He died to save others who traveled with him, so that they might deliver message of this coming doom to me, so that we might prepare for war." Eamon realized his mouth was open, and he closed it. His words seemed to come with great effort, as though each one was a boulder he had strained to push up and out of his chest. "But, Your Majesty, Mother, you said they would not be reborn in your lifetime." "I never said that," said Ennelin. "I said I hoped they would not be reborn in my lifetime. But that hope has failed. There is no question of it. The Necromancer has brought back his dark arts, and his favored servants now walk Underrealm again. They are those who death will not touch, the Shadeborn. Worse, it seems he has amassed great strength to himself, a greater strength of soldiers and arms than should have been possible, with no one detecting it until now. The messengers spoke of a stronghold of enemies in the mountains, but the Necromancer himself was not there. That tells us he must have other points of strength throughout Underrealm, and the one we have discovered is likely not even the greatest of them." Eamon stood, pacing back and forth. Though his mother's chamber was even grander than his own, it now felt impossibly small and closing in by the moment. "Do we know where he is? And what of the Lifemage? They must be out there. Always they are born together." He stopped and turned to her. "In fact, do we know it is a man?" "That we know, from what his soldiers said in the Great Rocks," said Ennelin. "But as for your other questions, no. We have no idea where he might be, nor the Lifemage. In fact, I have now told you the extent of what we do know." "Very well," said Eamon. "These are dark tidings, but now is the time for action. What can we do to prepare?" "I must think on that and take counsel, including with the mystics," said Ennelin. "I will require your presence at my table, of course. I hope you did not have other plans for the next few days." "How much time do you think we can waste sitting idly and planning?" said Eamon. "We have to make a decision. We must send all our forces to this stronghold and—" But he stopped short as he looked back at his mother. She was not quite slumped, but she was bowed in her chair, still looking as though she was crushed by a weight he could not see. Eamon's expression softened. He went and knelt before her chair, taking one of her hands in both of his own. "Mother," he said quietly, "it will be all right." She was not looking at him. "All my life I have worked to maintain order and peace in the 9 kingdoms, even before I took this throne." Now her gaze slid to him. This threatens all of it. This destroys all of it. There is no chance of peace, no tamping down this spark before it becomes a flame. There is every chance this war will outlast me, or even claim my life. I never wanted to be a wartime king. It will be my legacy, for good or for ill. Necromancer, quote-unquote, wink. That will not happen, said Eamon. Not while I am alive to prevent it. We shall weather this storm and bring it swiftly to its close. Whatever skills I have that might aid in that, I pledge them to you, and all my tireless effort. Nothing else shall consume my thoughts or plans. She gave a quiet, sad smile. Thank you, my son. Her hands rose to cup his face. It is for the lesser kings to decide whether you take the throne when I am gone. I shall have no say in it. But you deserve the throne. Your desire for action is no fault. It comes from your desire to make things better for our subjects, and I cherish you for that reason, among many others. Eamon gave her a worried smile. There is no higher praise, nor anyone I would rather hear it from. Together we can withstand this storm. I swear it. I will endeavor to believe you. Yeah, let's do this. Let's go for it. Chapter 12. Although I am going to need some motherfucking coffee. Coffee. I'll be right back. Okay, let's try to record one more chapter before I have to go. Chapter 12. Flight's End. Lifemage Dawning, Chapter 12. Flight's End. The orphanage was silent as Oris stole down the hall. Though the stairs were often creaky, now they lay silent beneath her feet. She had memorized every firm spot and now stepped only upon them. The upper hall was just as quiet as the lower, but here there were lanterns on side tables. The hall was not wide enough to make hiding in the shadows worth anything, and so she merely ran down the hall as quickly as she could. Her feet, too large for her young body, yet gave only slight whispers against the wood. Just ahead, the door to the faculty room stood ajar. Oris gave a quick glance behind her and then to the left. No one else seemed to be up. One or another of the attendants would be walking the halls, but they must all be downstairs. That would not last long. She took a deep breath. She had never used this door. Its hinge might be rusted and squeaky, and she whispered a brief prayer to the sky that it would not be. Her hand fell upon the latch, and she pushed. The door swung open silently. Oris released her breath, which seemed to hiss impossibly loud in the stillness. There, on the other side of the room, was the cabinet. It was where the matron stored anything she had confiscated from the children. Oris's hand rose by instinct to clutch her amulet, but it was not there. And then she belched. She scowled and stole forwards. The cabinet was unlocked. Oris was surprised at how few items lay inside. She scanned the shelves quickly. There it was, crystal shaped like an arrowhead, and a leather thong tied around the grooves. Oris scooped it up and ran her fingers over its edges. They were untouched. No harm had come to it. She loosed a long, quiet sigh. "Oresiot," she whirled. There in the door of the office stood Matron Fleda. The old woman was wizened and short, but not yet bent with age. Her dress was plain in cut and a lovely dark green in color, but her eyes were sharp and missed nothing, and they were trained on Oris now. "You could not have thought I would miss its absence. Did you think this would lessen your penalty?" "I do not care what penalty you lay upon me," said Oris. "It is mine. I will have it back." Matron Fleda sighed and folded her arms across her chest. "Oresiot, you must be aware that it is exactly this attitude that lost you the amulet in the first place." "There are rules," said Oris. "Your own rules. I am allowed to keep one thing. This is mine." "Then what will make you listen?" said Fleda. "You never attend. You will not obey. Your own rules," said Oris, in a voice very like a snarl. "I will not be parted from it. I will leave if you take it again. I will run away. It is mine. This you shall not take from me." For a long moment, Matron Fleda did not respond. They only stared at each other in the dim light of the lantern silhouetting her from behind. Then, at last, the old woman sighed and unfolded her arms. "Go to bed at once," she said sharply. "I am changing your chores to chamber pots for the rest of the month of Septis, and Octis as well." Oris could scarcely believe it. For a moment she only kept staring with wide eyes. Then she bowed her head. "Yes, matron." "We are not your enemies." Oris looked back up at her in confusion. "What?" "I and the other faculty. You always view us as foes to defeat, and nothing convinces you otherwise. You are determined to be right, regardless of what is right. One day I hope you learn that the world does not always bow to your will." Again Oris ducked her head. "I know that," she thought. "If the sky granted wishes, I would never have come here." But she did not say the words out loud. She had what she had come for. As Matron Fleda stepped aside, Oris stole down the hallway and crept back to bed. Scene break, 2.5 seconds of silence. Oris awoke. Her hand went to the amulet. Still there. She sighed with relief and sat up. Flip had taken the second watch from her, and now he slept. But Sylvan was awake, and Oris was only half surprised to see the mystic staring at her. As Oris blinked the last sleep from her eyes, Ilvin. As Oris blinked the last sleep from her eyes, Sylvan gave her a nod of greeting. Above them, the sky was gray with the coming dawn. A morning chill was in the air, and Oris pulled her blanket up around her shoulders. "You were moving in your sleep," said Sylvan. "Did you dream?" "No," lied Oris. "Do you know the lands between here and the seat?" Sylvan cocked her head. "Well enough." "How fast can we reach it?" "A week and a half, with luck," said Sylvan, looking away to the north. "What under the sky makes you think we'll have any luck?" Sylvan smiled without looking back. "We have evaded the enemy twice now. We will keep doing it as long as we have to. And once Jordell joins us, everything will be all right." "Everything?" snorted Oris. "Pardon me if I doubt." "It is quite understandable," said Sylvan. She glanced to Flip and then back again. "I had a question, now that we have a moment alone. What is that amulet you wear?" Oris sighed and lifted it out from under her shirt, twiddling it in her fingers. "I know little more than you do. I have had it my whole life. When I was a child, it was the only thing I owned all of my own. In the orphanage there were rules. Every child was allowed to have one inviolate possession. The amulet was mine." "But you do not remember where it came from," said Sylvan. Oris grimaced. "I have something. There was a man. I was a child, a very young one. I can see him giving me the amulet, and I remember the sound of his voice telling me to keep it always. So I have." "Was he your father?" said Sylvan. Oris shook her head at once. "No, I know that much. There's a feeling to the memory. And besides, the man was far too old. Likely he was only a kindly old man who saw a bedraggled orphan and wished to give her a present. I doubt he knew anything I doubt he knew there was anything special about it." Sylvan's mouth twisted. "I have little trust in coincidence, and especially when it comes to your life. Someone just so happened to give the Lifemage a gift that warns her of the necromancer's servants? The chance that was an accident is so slim as to be impossible." Oris shrugged. "Then you know more of it than I do, it seems." Soon they woke Flip and set off north again. Their aim was to travel almost to the Great Bay. Just before they reached it, they would turn west and make for Garsek, Selvin's capital, from where they could take a passage Selvin's capital, from where they could take passage on a ship to bring them to the seat itself. All the first day they looked often behind them, fearful of seeing figures pursuing them across the wilderness. But there was no sign, and by the second day they grew more hopeful than they had But there was no sign, and by the second day they grew more hopeful that they had outpaced their pursuers at last. The sky above them was gray and cloudy, a melancholy blanket thrown over the sky and dampening their mood. "This is a good sign," said Sylvan. "My heart misses the sun, but we will be harder to spot. It is a boon so long as the sky does not turn to rain." At the end of the first day they crossed the Carmen River, twisting and bending in upon itself on its way to join the Dragon's Tail. They kept going until they were out of sight of the Carmen's banks, and then they made their camp. But they were moving again before first light. The land was flat and featureless at first, but then it began to break up. Hills and small ridges thrust up all around them, like rumpled skirts of the Wadish mountains far to the east. Oris and Sylvan did their best to navigate around the rougher terrain, and whenever they came to a high place that let them survey the lands around, they would pause and rest for a while as they determined how best to avoid any sudden obstacles. This was the southern end of the Samilla Valley, and they knew the terrain would only get rougher the further north they went. On the third day, the clouds parted and the sun came out. It made for a nerve-wracking day of their journey, but towards evening they breathed a sigh of relief, for they passed into a wide forest, the same great wood, in fact, that stretched far to the west and into Dorsey, the breeze boughs where they had walked along the Dragon's Tail, and Ombi had met his doom. But this was its eastern edge, and it was not so thick. That night they camped under the fishy Heidegger football. That night they camped under its southern boughs, and the next night in its heart, and the next midday they emerged again into open country. It was a wide grassland, criss-crossed with small ponds and streams running between them. They twisted and spun, but all of them went northeast in the end, towards Vianya Lake far away. "We shall not be so lucky again," said Sylvan, placing a gentle hand on the trunk of the last tree. "This is the Langmote, and it hides little. After that, it is open land between us and the Great Bay. If our pursuers should draw within a league of us, they will have little difficulty spotting us as we flee across the landscape. Now I do hope for rain. It will slow us, but it will hide us as well." The world might not have been built to grant wishes, but the sky seemed to grant Sylvan's now. In just a few hours the sky grew darker, and then the sky unleashed lightning and rain upon the land. They drew their oiled cloaks tighter about themselves and pressed on through it. Each night it was a struggle to find a dry place to shelter for the night, and they lit no fires. Life became a dreary trudge, and their moods sunk to meet it. They spoke little and sang not at all. The storm worsened as they passed out of the Langmote and into the hilly country between the Marol River to the east and the Clamor Run to the west. But here there were some roads and local footpaths that made their way easier, though they avoided any causeway that drew too near to a settlement. On the 8th day, Sylvan started to look almost hopeful. "We are almost to the coast," she said, shouting to be heard over the storm. "We shall have to find a place to shelter from the rain overnight, but we are almost done bedding down in the wild. Tomorrow the coastal road should let us reach Garsek, and then the seat." "Thank the sky," said Flip. "Drakmund made me lazy, and I liked it. I hope your master's coin is still able to secure us some nice soft beds." Sylvan smiled despite herself. "It shall be my pleasure." They reached the coastal road soon after. It ran west a ways before diving into hilly country again, close to the towns of Kendall and Mallow. The broken land pressed close on all sides of the road, and they could never see farther than the next bend or two. Oris got the feeling that the hills were looking down at them, looming like soldiers with weapons at their belts. "Sylvan," said Oris, "what if the Shades reached the coast before us? It would be easy for them to watch the road and prepare for our coming." "They could hardly have traveled faster than we did," said Sylvan. "Even with that brute Barrack whipping them on?" said Flip. Sylvan frowned and did not answer. The day was wearing on, and Oris began to think they should find a place to shelter for the night. They came upon a stone bridge that spanned a narrow cut, through which ran a river 2 paces below them, running north towards the Great Bay. "We might camp under the bridge," said Oris. "It'll stave off the rain, and we aren't likely to find better shelter before it gets dark." "Darker, you mean?" said Flip, glaring at the stormy sky. "I would rather press on," said Sylvan, though Oris could see the doubt in her eyes. The farther we go today, the earlier we reach the seat. It could make the difference between reaching it during the day or after nightfall." "Do you mean to keep running through the night, then?" said Oris. "Please tell her you don't," moaned Flip. "I may want a proper bed, but just now I could die happy in my bedroll." Sylvan paused for a moment in doubt, but then her eyes shot wide with fear. "Oris," she said, pointing. Oris looked down. Her amulet was glowing again. "Dark!" she spat, pulling it out before it grew hot to the touch. Flip whirled, flames springing to life in his palms. Raindrops hissed and steamed as they struck it. "Bloody inconvenient! Where are they? Behind or ahead?" "It's not a compass," growled Oris. "To be fair, you don't quite know what it is," said Flip. "We cannot stand and fight," said Sylvan. "We have to run." "Either way we'd run could lead us straight to them," said Oris. "Do you wish to—" "Do you wish to toss that coin, or do you have another plan?" "I do," said Sylvan. "This." She seized Oris's and Flip's arms in a grip like iron manacles. With a heave and a leap, she threw all three of them off the bridge. Sky above, she's strong. The thought whipped through Oris's mind and was gone. Oris did not even have time to yelp in surprise before plunging into the water. Thankfully, it was much warmer here than the Dragon's Tail in the south, and Oris fought her way back to the surface at once. "Dark take you, woman!" sputtered Flip as he scrambled for the bank. "You did not think for a moment that we could have climbed down." "This was faster," said Sylvan, stroking calmly through the water. "And we would have gone in the river regardless. Don't climb out. Swim with the current for a moment." "Mayhap next time you could ask before heaving us off a bridge," said Oris. "Mayhap next time you could ask before hoisting me over your shoulder," said Sylvan. "As though you didn't enjoy that," muttered Flip. "Why must I be the one to suffer the consequences of you two posturing at each other?" Sylvan ignored him. "Stop here a moment." They reached the bank just around the next turn in the river. Looking back, Oris saw they were about a span away from the road. Dark figures appeared upon the bridge, little more than shadowy shapes in the rain. Several figures came from the west, but then a few came from the east. One among the eastern group stood head and shoulders taller than the rest. Oris Charcuterie. Oris shuddered as she recognized Barrick's silhouette. "I am glad we did not flip the coin," she said. "It looks like both sides were stamped with moons instead of heads." "Indeed," said Sylvan. "Come, we should swim on a little ways farther before coming out of the water to walk again. They may guess we have gone this way." They followed the river for 2 long hours until it finally spilled into the Great Bay. Fucking God damn this kid. There's a kid in our neighborhood who keeps coming and knocking on the door asking to play with the kids. The kids don't want to play with him, and we keep telling him not to show up before 10 o'clock in the morning because most of the kids, 2 of the kids are still in bed, and he does not listen. It's driving me a little bit crazy, honestly, and I'm trying not to be a real dick to a kid. He's like 8, but God damn, it's driving me crazy. Anyway, Chewie was barking. That's why that came up. So I just want to finish this chapter. They followed the river for 2 long hours until it finally spilled into the Great Bay. The rain kept up the whole time, though it did soften before... Soften? The rain kept up the whole time, though it did soften before they reached the river mouth. There they found a small fishing village. Sylvan stopped them a span away from the cluster of homes, with candlelight glistening merrily on their windows. From their windows. Sylvan stopped them a span away from the cluster of homes, with candlelight glistening merrily from their windows. "Stay here," she said. "I am going to get us a boat to sail a while before we sleep." "Why not stay in the village?" said Flip. "We must be able to find a barn or some other place we can hide from this damnable rain." "That would endanger these people," said Sylvan. "Beric and the Shades will be searching this area. If they find our trail and it leads them here—" "Fine, fine," growled Flip. "But if I catch my death of cold out here, I hope you'll feel very guilty." "I shall be despondent," said Sylvan, arching an eyebrow. "Now wait here and stay hidden." In half an hour she returned and led them to the shore, where they found a little boat waiting for them. Oris suspected Sylvan had flashed her mystic badge to secure it. They climbed in the boat, and Oris took the oars, rowing them into open water. Then Sylvan unfurled the sails and took the tiller, steering them northwest. Oris and Flip did not have much experience with sailing, but they could follow instructions, and they did as Sylvan bid them to keep the boat moving. When the last of the thin gray light was fading from the sky, they saw a spur of land protruding out from in front of them. Some spans off down its shore were the glimmering lights of a village Sylvan told them was named Kendall. They landed the boat, hauled it up on the shore, and turned it on its side, providing some shelter against the droning rain. "We should get what rest we can," said Sylvan. "I shall watch tonight." "We should trade," said Oris. "You'll be little good to us tomorrow if you're half dead from weariness." Sylvan smirked. "This will not be my first sleepless night. You and Flip can take shelter." "At last you speak sense," said Flip, "and I'll offer no arguments." Soon it was done. Flip climbed in first, and Oris followed him. Their bedrolls were soaked through from the river, but they laid them out anyway to keep the sand from getting into their every nook and cranny. Oris thought that nerves might keep her awake, but she was so weary that she soon drifted off. The last thing she saw before sleep took her was Sylvan sitting alone on the shore, and behind her the great bay, where Oris imagined she might have been able to see the seat, if not for the rain that hid it from view. The day dawned bright and peaceful, and curiously quiet. The rain had died in the night, but Oris groaned as she sat up, feeling a deep soreness in her arms from rowing the night before. At least she was not freezing cold. The air was decently warm, and the heat of her and Flip's bodies had made the space under the boat quite tolerable. Out on the shore, Sylvan's eyes looked somewhat hollow, but there was no trace of weariness in her body as she rose and helped Oris climb out from under the boat. "Good morn," she said. "Take heart despite your aching limbs, for our road is almost at its end. By sundown we shall be safe on the seat." "Safe?" snorted Oris. "Marginally safer, you mean, as I'm sure Flip will remind us when he rises." Sylvan smiled. She stopped into the town of Kendall briefly. There she left word to be relayed to the fisher who had rented them the boat that it could be collected from the nearby shore. The little fishing vessel was ill-suited to carry them the rest of the way, and the last of their journey would be completed on foot. Oris and Flip awaited Sylvan's return impatiently, and once she returned, they all set off together at a hard pace. A well-kept stone road ran along the coast from Kendall all the way to Garsek, and it was a joy to travel on firm ground again after the slog north. It also afforded excellent vision both behind and ahead, so that they no longer journeyed under the constant fear of Beric and the Shades appearing close by. Their steps came lively now, and their moods lightened. Oris turned to look northwest where the seat lay, wondering if she really could see it as she had imagined the night before. But the great bay was shrouded almost entirely by fog. "A misty morning," she said. "It is not unheard of on the bay, though it is a tad unseasonable," said Sylvan. "But no matter. We shall see the seat clearly enough when we step upon its docks. Let us get moving." Scene break, 2.5 seconds of silence. High King Enelin sat upon her throne, listening to a report being read off to her by an attendant. Her mind was elsewhere, but she was reasonably certain she was being informed about tax complaints in Idris. She stared at the courtier, a tall, thin man with intense eyes and a bulging way of speaking, and let her thoughts drift away west, to a stronghold in the Great Rocks and the city of Wellmont. A wartime king, she thought. Eamon's constant assurances were ash in her mouth. This would be her legacy, had already become her legacy. In the weeks since learning of the Shades, she had mustered every soldier she could and sent them marching west in 2 forces. A smaller force would investigate the Shade stronghold where Jordell had died. The larger force would proceed to Wellmont, still under siege from the city of Dorsey. Her advisers suspected the Shades played some part in fomenting the battle there. The lack could be felt across the seat. Even in her own throne room, there were only half as many guards as normal. A skeleton garrison guarded the city, their numbers stretched thin. It occurred to her that she had entirely lost the thread of what the courtier was saying. She raised a hand. He stopped speaking at once and bowed his head. "I have lost you somewhere," declared Enelin. "I suspect it is because you are throwing so many figures at me. Figures I might better understand if they were written down rather than read off to me in a manner that keeps me from relating them to each other. Is there anything in your report you would wish to obfuscate?" The man's cheeks flamed as he raised his head to look at her. "Of course not, Your Majesty," he said. "Then submit to me a document of what you are trying to tell me, as well as your proposed solution," said Enelin. "If I require your further counsel afterwards, then I shall summon you." The man's jaw clenched, but he nodded. "Of course, Your Majesty," he said. "Shall it suffice for me to submit a copy of the last report I sent you and to which I am still waiting to hear a reply, or would you prefer I update the figures and send a new one?" Enelin could not quite suppress a small smile. "You can hide a bob, I will give you that. I did not know such a report had already been submitted. I shall have my assistants locate it and—" From outside the palace, horns began to blare. Enelin shot to her feet. Everyone else in the room fell to one knee, but she ignored them as the horns droned on and on. A wartime king. Scene break. 2.5 seconds of silence. Oris, Flip, and Sylvan had taken the fishing boat to avoid leaving tracks, but it was not as fast as walking. Since they had already left signs of their encampment and did not wish to take the time to hide them, Sylvan decided they would travel on foot the rest of the way to the seat. They followed the shore for a time, but eventually it began to wind enough that they decided to risk returning to the road. Oris's hackles rose as they navigated through the hills again, but there was no sign of the enemy. "They might still be searching to the east," said Oris. "Or the rain could have washed away their tracks," said Sylvan. "We must still be as cautious as ever." But despite her words, they began to push west faster and faster. Soon they were half jogging, and not even Flip spoke a word of complaint at the pace. Each of them could feel eyes at their backs. There was a frightening sense that they were too exposed, as though an arrow might come flying at any moment. Could Beric be lying in wait behind that hill, or in that ditch? Yet Garsek was only a few hours away. If they could just reach it, if they could just reach the seat, everything would be all right. That was what Oris kept telling herself. The morning wore on. The thick mist on the air slowly dissipated. The air remained cool, yet they were working up a heavy sweat, which the sun whisked pleasantly away from their skin. "Almost there," said Sylvan, panting. "Do you see that next ridge? From atop it, we can see the seat." "Never my favorite place," gasped Flip. "But just now it shall seem a paradise." They began to climb. The land sloped steeply upwards, and the road cut back and forth across it. Oris's legs were burning now, but she pushed on. Nothing mattered except seeing the seat, seeing safety. And then an instant before she crested the ridge, in the back of her mind there came a thought. That smell on the air. Is that smoke? She reached the top of the ridge and stopped. Sylvan froze beside her. Flip had lagged a few paces behind, but a moment later he came stumbling and wheezing to stand beside them. He, too, froze in his tracks, and his heavy breath. He, too, froze in his tracks, and his heavy, heaving breaths. He, too, froze in his tracks, and his heaving breaths slowly quieted. The seat lay burning before them. Okay, God, I'm so late. So late. All right, who are we rating? Oh. Yeah, thought so. Let's raid Ray Music. Ray Music is... Nope. All right. Two chapters banged out today, meaning we've got... How many left? Okay, that was the halfway point in terms of number of chapters. It was not the halfway point on word count. We got 3 more chapters before we hit the halfway word count. But still, we're making progress. I gotta get to bed on time tonight so that I can get up on time tomorrow and actually have some good streaming time. So wish me luck on that. I'm going to do my best to be reasonable about it, although I am totally addicted to Sandman currently. But anyway, peace out, everyone. I'm going to throw it over to Ray. Say hi to her for me, and I will see you next time. Bye.
Every step you take, I'll be watching you. Every breath you take, every move you make, every bond you break, every step you take, I'll be watching you. Every breath you take, every move you make, every bond you break, every step you take, I'll be watching you. Every breath you take, every move you